Hey there guys, and welcome back to episode 6 of Europe in Detail. And in this episode, it's really exciting. We're putting the tram in. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm not going to fluff around. I'm not going to waste any time. We need to get into this because this is a big episode and it's jam-packed full of goodness. So the first thing that you'll see me do is upgrade a couple of the roads that were already running into this little flat part of the town to tram tracks, and then run them out of town, and they're going to meet up with a train station that's just plopped really quickly and ugly for now, and that's going to run from the edge of the map. So essentially the train line will bring people in from out of town, in one side of the map and out another side of the map, and there'll be an exchange point with this tram line that brings people into the town, and it works very well. There's so many people coming in on the tram later on. So what you see me trying to do here initially is I'm trying to create just a line with the tram, and in vain. The game will not let you just create a tram line. It has to be a loop. Even if it is a line with just a loop on either end, I just couldn't figure out any way to create a line just from one point and back to the other. So like I say, I try in vain here. You'll see me try and connect just the cube service for the tram hub up to each end of the line, and yeah, it doesn't work. So eventually you'll see what I do here. But I gotta say, it was quite intimidating putting this in because I didn't really know too much about tram lines, and let alone how they are in European cities. So I ended up doing a little bit of research around why tram lines were put in, when they were put in, and what sort of areas in the towns and cities were they sort of put in to begin with. The first tram lines were installed around the mid 1880s in Europe, and by the early 1900s most European cities had them, or major European cities, and this pretty much single-handedly abolished the old horse-drawn cart, and with that came a whole lot of health benefits. Obviously, no one wants poop in the street. And initially it was more the middle class to wealthy that used the trams, because the poorer or lower class people didn't really have a need to leave their neighborhood. They stuck pretty close to where they were, whereas the maybe the higher class or the middle class used the tram to travel to more desirable locations. And that leads me to another point. Most of these tram lines, when they were first installed, ran to really upmarket commercial areas and into busy areas where it made sense to move people through those areas. Local businesses in these particular areas would have seen a massive boost in their sales because of more customers in the area, and generally customers of a higher quality, so they're spending more money, or they're prepared to spend more money. And this is really just scratching the surface when it comes to trams and their introduction in Europe. But even with this knowledge, I've used this in the way that I've integrated it into this little town. So it's coming into probably one of the more upmarket areas. It's very close to the museum that we put in the last episode, which you can see now why this is starting to make a little bit more sense. This part of the town is also going to be a little bit more modern than the rest of it, obviously, with the money flowing into this part of the town from tourism in particular. Some of these buildings you will see have upgraded to really nice and quite contemporary style modern buildings, and it definitely started with the art gallery. So what I ended up doing with the end of the line here is just making a really small loop, and I'm going to eventually put a building over this and just make it look like it goes through two doors and into sort of like a maintenance shed or a storage shed for when the tram's not running. And like I touched on earlier, I don't really want a loop here. It doesn't make any sense. They wouldn't have had the infrastructure to be able to build an entire loop. When you think about it, it's really building more than twice the road for nothing. When you can have a line that runs back and forth on the same road, it's far less construction involved. And I've hidden the small loop on the end with this building because I just want it to look like a line. So I used this old brick fire station building that I found on the Steam Workshop and modify it a little bit by pulling these doors back a bit deeper and sort of making it look like these tracks run into the doors. And eventually I will tuck the loop in and make it really tight so it's inside the building, because you won't see the trams go around here. It doesn't matter really what it looks like. But before I do that, I make sure I get the line in, because sometimes the game doesn't allow you to put lines in if you have nodes too close together. So I make sure to get that in first and then squeeze the loop down after that. Once we've squeezed that loop down, I don't quite get it all inside the fire station building in one go, so we put a few more buildings down here, and I'm trying to make sure that this looks like an older part of the town. This is still going to have a lot of history, even though there's going to be sort of a few modern buildings sprinkled here and there as well. And I use procedural objects for most of these buildings here just so that I can manipulate them into the right size and shape that I want. But eventually I'll put cube surfaces in all of these because I want to do my best to make this a usable area. So we run a road around here as well that just loops back on itself, and we do something really shady as well, which is one of sort of my old school tricks, and that's just to run a road in the middle of some large buildings so that they're being serviced with trucks and stuff dropping goods off, but you can't see it. So I've got pedestrian areas on either side of the building with no chance of any dirty trucks showing up and running a whole lot of pedestrians over. And I haven't experimented with the new mod building spawn points enough, but I'm probably assuming that I could do something with that and eliminate the need for this altogether, but I'll have a crack at that maybe in another episode. So now we have a heap of people making their way towards the town on the tram, and I've got most of the buildings in, so let's move on to some detailing. The first thing to do is use node controller and get these intersections looking a little bit nicer before we spend hours detailing around them. And I was about to start detailing this little plaza here, and then I decided I'm going to chuck a couple more buildings in here. It just didn't look quite right. So I used good old procedural objects again and use it to manipulate these buildings and get them the right size. And instead of using cube surfaces in these ones, I end up using little wee shops that sort of slide in to these existing buildings, and they look really cool. And I've made a point to use modern looking shops so that it looks like these old buildings have been upgraded, or rather they have modern shop fronts in them now. And then I had a little bit of a light bulb moment, and I thought, I wonder if I could use node controller to narrow the canal in places, because it's very rare that we see the same size canal running right through a European city. They normally narrow and get wider and go up and down a little wee bit, and I thought this would make it a little bit more realistic. And because everything is basically being built around the canals, they have to be where I want them to start with. So once they're in place and I'm happy with them, I move over to where I'm going to install the tram stop and upgrade it to this road where there's a platform in the middle. And there's no particular reason for this, I just really like the look of this particular stop, and it's going to look really cool when it's finished. But before we carry on with the detailing for that, we go over and chuck the shady road in that I was talking about earlier. And you can see what I mean here. I run it right through the middle of all of these buildings to service them. And then I spend a little bit of time making it look like there's a door that the trucks and stuff go through. And I did want to make sure that it looked like they were just not driving into the side of the building. But at the same time, I wanted to make this pretty non-assuming. I didn't want it to stand out, because I don't think there's too many ways that you can justify having a truck drive into the side of a building, even if there is a tunnel there. But, you know, it makes sense for the whole servicing part of it. So I'm, like I say, non-assuming detailing here. I don't want to draw attention to it, but at the same time, I don't want to see anybody see a truck drive into a building. And once we're done with that mysterious tunnel, we can move on and carry along with the canal edge here where it dips away into the sea. So I just use the same brick wall that comes with the same Dutch canal pack and then carry it along here in a nice level fashion, and then carry along putting ploppable asphalt down as a surface, and then just sort of blend that back into the ground level. So now we start putting our little wee modern shops in that we touched on earlier, and because we've got our magical road running through the middle of these buildings, we're free to put pedestrian path down on the edge of the canal here. I used the raised vanilla one initially, and then upgrade it to an invisible one eventually. Then we can put some decals down and a few props, and it's already looking pretty cool. So now I can move back to the tram stop, and the first thing I do is put another tram stop in on the other side of the platform here and make sure I can see where people are going and waiting before I start detailing it. So once these lines start bringing some people into the town, I can see where they're going to stand on the platform, whereabouts they walk in from, and also exactly where the tram stops so that I can line the stop and the platforms up properly. And now it's time to detail this sucker. And we start with the basic stuff that we're going to need. So the platforms, any surfaces, we've got to cover over that horrible clipping. And then we slowly move through the pecking order of necessity, I guess you'd call it. So we start with the things we need greatly, and then we finish with things like tram signs and decals. Now I'm going to go and hazard a guess here and say that because this is an active little part of the town, or an active town on the tourism side of things, that this particular tram stop has probably been upgraded a lot. You know, maybe it's on some sort of plan where they get a budget so they can upgrade it every 10 years or so. And I know that some European cities have clauses in their buildings where if you're building a new build, you have to use similar materials to the area or stick in line with a particular building style or method. And I'm just going to go ahead and make the rules here because this is my town, and I'm going to say that the council here, the local council, have made them use similar building materials to what's been used in the past. But obviously things like safety and accessibility would have improved over the years. So long story short, we still see cobblestone roads and lots of stone used everywhere, but the accessibility here in particular would have been improved a lot over the years, and I'm really trying to reflect that here with the way that I've built this. And it's also very simple. Most tourists have come to see the town, not some fancy looking tram stop, you know? I've taken the opportunity to use this external corner on the edge of the canal here to make this, I want to make it look like a new cafe, but it's like an old blacksmith building that's been turned into the cafe sort of thing. It's got this really nice large wooden deck out over the edge of the canal, and I end up putting this sort of old wooden pergola in that's all broken and covered in vines, and this would just be a lovely place to come and sit and have something to eat or have a quick drink and just gaze over at the art gallery and around at the tram and all the buzz. And I'm really doing my best to make this place look like it had been preserved. You know, there's lots of timber. There's not a lot of straight timber, it's a bit bent and weathered and could be hundreds of years old. Lots of flowers and yeah, just a lot of that sort of natural beauty buzz going on here. And I slip a couple of modern looking cafe buildings into this old blacksmith building as well, and then just continue to chuck all the appropriate things down on this deck for a restaurant. So the whole idea behind this building is I think it's really important to preserve the history of the town, even in this sort of flattish area where it's really tempting to put more modern buildings in and things like that. But you can clearly see how much more character is in an old building like this as opposed to maybe a more modern one. And yeah, this is great. I really enjoy how this comes out. It just looks fantastic. And this will of course be offset by some more modern buildings in future, but I don't think this is going to look out of place whatsoever. So guys, I need you to prepare yourselves for some serious detailing for the rest of this episode, because we go really deep on the detailing. And I'm doing my best here to make every shop look different from the one next to it. And we do a couple of unique things here. We sort of enclose this out here with a bit of glass and make it sort of a wind and weatherproof area for someone who might want a meal outside still. And we get along to some really cool stuff after that too that I've never done before, which is pretty cool. And it's really all in the name of realism. I'm just trying to create a little bit more immersion with the city, and in particular this part here. This may be a sort of one of only a handful of areas that are flat in this entire town, and flat in this instance means a lot of tourism, and there's a number of reasons why this would be the most touristic part of the city. but I'm not going to speak on all of those because the video would go for too long. But that's the reason why I'm really spending time detailing this up. And this next little bit that I touched on earlier that we move on to is one of these shop fronts here is recessed a little bit, so I thought this might be a great opportunity to build the shop out a little bit more with glass and make it look like, you know, you can actually see into the shop type of thing. And I put some little counters in here and change the decals on the ground and install the glass like I mentioned, and it kind of works. I think at the very least it looks a little bit more interesting than what it did without it, so that's a win in my books. It feels so good to get that area all finished and detailed. That took a lot longer than you might think. And now I can plop the handful of buildings down over on the coast side of this little island. And the first thing you'll notice is that these buildings are quite a lot newer than the little wee medieval buildings that we've been putting in before. These are still obviously a few hundred years old, but yeah, much more modern than those old little buildings. And this is just in tune with what we've been doing up to this point, the upgrading of buildings where it's become more popular or more touristic, and also the preservation of historical or beautiful buildings. And most of these buildings are functioning as normal buildings because they're perfectly roadside, which makes my job very easy, and then I can move on to detailing in and around them. And I keep it fairly simple here because, to be honest, these buildings are gorgeous. There's so much going on the facades. I didn't really need to detail it all that much. Most of that detailing was around where the trams enter into this sort of maintenance or storage shed that I've installed earlier. I wanted to make it look like there was gates here that could be closed, and also I wanted to cover over these bright red doors on the building. They sort of looked a little bright, so I've just put sort of blank black doors over them. Then we can decorate the area with a few trees and stuff like that. But like I say, I don't go too overboard here. It's quite simple. I've kept most of the detailing to the coastlines. So speaking of the coastline, let's move on to it right here. And I've got to say that I took a lot of inspiration from this little village here. This is in, I'm pretty sure it's in Italy. And to be honest with you guys, I've taken a lot of inspiration in general from this little village. It's just gorgeous. I mean, it's got so much character to it. And the coastline in particular, it's got this little wee breakwater here that creates this little inlet for some boats in the harbour, and it's got this really cool little triangle piece of sand where some boats are hauled up on it, and I really love that little bit. It's got an old stone boat ramp, and that's exactly what we're going to look to do here. But we are going to move it around somewhat. The beach is on the other side to that village in Italy, and some other things are going to change a little bit as well. We had a restaurant right out here on an old pier, and yeah, it's going to look really cool. So in terms of detailing and how I want this to look out here, I'm not too fussed on this looking perfect. Obviously it needs to make sense. The stairs need to match up and be made of stone, and all the correct materials need to be used in that regard. But I'm not too worried if it doesn't match up perfectly, you know, if something's a little bit crooked or whatever, because it all just sort of adds to the mix and really adds that touch of realism. And this whole pier is my favourite part of the town so far because it looks so good. It looks so realistic when we're done, and it's also quite unique because I'm following a blueprint that I've seen from that little village in Italy. You know, this is quite far away from what I would have put here naturally, so that's definitely counting as well. And I believe that these little areas of imperfection, like the rocks on the back and weeds growing through and around the breakwater and all of that sort of thing, I use some tiled walls that are broken and chipped. They sort of all add to the realism, because real cities and real scenes aren't perfect, they're far from it. And when we're talking about building a city in this game for realism, then, you know, it should probably reflect that in some way or another. And of course, all of that aside, I am lucky enough to have a PC that can handle all the mods required for that, because that is probably the #1 stumbling block. I've seen a lot of beautiful European cities on YouTube before that just really lack detail to bring them to life, and that could be no fault of the creator whatsoever if they're trying to power up a potato. And if I tried to do this on a large scale, I wouldn't even start. There's just no way I'd be able to. The city would lag out in no time. But anyway, right at the very point of this island here, I want to put some really ancient ruins in. Like, these may have been here right from the city's creation or very near it, and these are sort of remnants of that old town. And maybe this area here and the area just across where we built the Gotstadt tunnel, maybe those ruins and these ruins were sort of towers that were protecting this place, and they've fallen on both sides, and what's left here is the remains. Then I make this sort of cantilevered looking sidewalk and put a railing down it, and then put some vegetation underneath it, and it looks like it's sort of hanging out over the water's edge. And again, this is just for a bit of variety. And as this moves along towards the breakwater that we made at the beginning of the coastline detailing, it opens out into that little sandy cove where the boats are going to be. And man, I just love how this little bit turns out. The boats that float on the water, the prop boats, they cast a shadow onto the bottom of the sea, and you can see them floating, and it just looks gorgeous. Adds to the whole scene really well, I think. Then we offset the whole area with this beautiful old restaurant up here on this old little dock / pier area, and I've made this in an old church. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. That might sort of be taboo for one reason or another, but someone will let me know in the comments, I'm sure, if it is. But there's going to be 2 different cafes / restaurants running out of this church, one out of the front side and one out of the seaside here, and they're going to be 2 pretty distinct styles. The one coming out of the side is going to be quite spacious and a little bit more upmarket, and the one on the dock side or the seaside is going to be a little bit more crammed up and a lot more social. And you guys will see some really nice cinematics from this coming up very shortly, and I'm so wrapped with them. Like I said earlier, this whole area is just so good. I'm so pleased with it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys think in the comments. And if you've got any suggestions and all the rest of it, please let me know. And those of you who are hanging out for New Zealand, I'm getting there. I'm sorting some pretty big problems with the save at the moment, and I'm hoping to get back and build in there in the near future. But in the meantime, I hope you guys are enjoying this, because I'm having an absolute blast building in this series. And I think it's pretty important to stay stoked, to avoid that dreaded burnout, because I can tell you with some certainty, the moment this feels like a job, I am done. Well guys, this is what we've built in all its glory. What do you think of this? I've changed the cube map replacer, so we've got a really nice sunrise in the background, and this is looking really good. There's plenty of life going on. The tram looks great coming in, and the coastline, wow, like I've said many times, I'm so stoked with it. I mean, look how gorgeous it looks with these boats. I'm really happy with this. So please guys, if you've enjoyed that, hit the thumbs up. It does me a massive favor, and comment if you want to help me out even more, and subscribe if you don't already. I will see you guys on the next episode of Europe in Detail. See you later guys.